Hi guys, welcome back again to Life of Education's podcast. We're here today with great British ultra elite marathon runner Lee Grantham. Grantham, correct?
It is.
I've confused myself as a Grantham, yep. Jungle.vip on Instagram if you want to check him out. Very interesting page there. This is our second time speaking with you. Caroline missed the first one. So it's
sadly.
It's her first time meeting you on camera.
Yeah, nice to see you guys again.
Yeah, how are you feeling today? Yesterday in the calendar was the Abu Dhabi Marathon.
Yep.
How you feeling?
I feel good. I'm training a lot at the moment, so I'm sort of building up towards next season. There's some big races next year. So yesterday was just a training race. So I feel I came away with a decent, like an 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were going for something different though. You weren't just doing the 42. You had a different plan.
Yeah. So I was trying to run 50k. When you do, like, obviously I'm an ultra distance runner. So when you do your long runs, it can be a case of like going out the night before, putting bottles in certain places, nutrition in certain places, or having somebody cycle by the side of you. So when you're running more than a marathon, it's quite useful to do that in a marathon. So I'll get an invite from a race, and then the drink stations, the energy stations will be along the way. So that's all set up. And also there's a psychological point where it's easier to run faster when you're with other people, and obviously you're basically practicing race tactics as well in a certain way. Sort of you're with groups, etc. So my plan was to do 50k in 3 hours 20. And I ended up doing 40k in a faster time, but just 40k.
So you go on.
Oh, I was going to ask you briefly before I heard you speaking about you have a goal to run 100k in the fastest time. Can you explain this objective and this goal to me?
Yeah. So the thing I like about this sport is like we were there yesterday, Keith, and we saw like the top guys. A lot of the time they're from a pocket of East Africa, like Kenya, Ethiopia, Rift Valley, Eritrea, and Uganda. And sort of like it's very, very, very like it's incredible. I think for London 2012, the stat was there was 550 Kenyans qualified for the Olympic marathon, and 2 British people. So that's the standard you're dealing with. So it makes it so that it's brilliant, and I love it for East Africa. But when it comes to ultra running, there's a lot more planning and a lot more. It's a lot more of like a grassroots sport more, and so there's something like 60-70 nationalities represented when you go to the World Championships. So you're literally racing against people from all the way around the world. Whereas if you watch an Olympic final, in a 10,000 meters, there's probably 7 or 8 nationalities maximum represented. So it's a lot more international. So that's a good thing. But 100k world record is like 6 hours and 10 minutes. Just short.
Who holds the world record right now?
Japanese guy.
Really,
guy.
yeah?
And the Japanese have held it for a while. Yeah.
And your goal, sorry to interrupt you, is to break that record.
Yeah, so my goal is to break that record.
Amazing.
So you have to sustain 3 minutes and 41 seconds per kilometer for 6 hours and 10 minutes. So yeah, it's...
Say it again, 3 minutes and what?
3 minutes and 41 seconds for 6 hours and 10 minutes. Yeah.
Wow.
To break the record, that's the time that you have to do.
That's the time. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And it's...
and when are you planning to do this?
So the World Championships is in Holland in September, but conditions are really important. Like you need, as you may have saw, like the Breaking 2 Ineos event in Vienna this year. They tried to, with ALOE Kipchoge, Nike tried to break 2 hours with control situation. So the temperature was perfect, the humidity, etc. was perfect. So you need the best conditions, and probably the fastest race in the world is in Japan in June. So have the British Championships in May, or the 100k in, which is also 100k, and then 100k in Japan in June, and the World Championships to decide from this year. So it's whether to be world champion or go for the world record.
Which would you prefer?
I'd prefer to take world record.
Yeah.
Because then it's the world record is the best of anybody on any day at any time ever. So to have that would be more important than just be the world champion one. Yeah, but both are good.
Yeah. And how far off that target are you these days currently?
Yeah. So the way you sort of work around it is you've got to build the pace. I already can sustain that pace for a certain amount of hours. I could probably sustain that for 75, 80k. So my marathon, when I run a marathon, it's like 320 per kilometer. When I run 50k, it's like 328 per kilometer. So it's just a case of like having that as your regular pace and sustaining it. You need a little bit of luck. It's still like a marathon. There's still a lot of things that can go wrong. You need to get your nutrition right. You need the perfect conditions. You don't want there to be any wind and things like that. But I mean, it's a difficult question to answer, but I'd say I'm like 20k away. If that makes sense. Like I can hold it for 80k, but not 100k right now. And then in striving to do it, the training that you need to do, problems can come in there. Like to strive, there's potential to break and stuff like that. So it happened this year where I went for something 50k. I wanted to break the British record for 50k. And
what is that at the moment?
So the British record is 2:48, and that was broke this year by one of my teammates in Croatia. Romania. And yeah, the previous British record was 2:52 or 2:53, so he broke it by a long way. Great athlete, Dan Nash, and that's what I wanted to do at that race. But in doing so, like the month before, I got a calf tear, and so I wasn't able to attend the race. So it's like I was as fit as I've ever been, and that's the sort of risk that you take in order to, like, super compensation is like stressing the body to a point that it can then handle more stress in the future. So I just stressed it too far. It may have been a lack of confidence. I don't think so. It was more of like trying to be greedy with fitness. Like I knew I was really fit, so I knew I could do really hard workouts. I tried to do, it was like second to last hard workout before the race, and it just went, and there's just no returning back from it. I had loads of physio, loads of sort of intrusive stuff, and I just didn't happen. But you have to keep trying, yeah.
Just to put it in perspective for us mere mortals, what is your quickest 10k time if you were to go flat out?
It's tricky. I don't do them. So all my personal bests are within a marathon, because that's like the shortest distance I run. So
what would you get to the 10k point at?
I think if I was given like 8 weeks to train for 10k, I would run 30 minutes.
3-0.
Yeah.
And then what's your quick half marathon?
Within London Marathon, the first half of London Marathon, like 68 minutes.
Jeez.
Yeah. So don't get me wrong. I mean, not like when you're in the Middle East or you're in Asia, these like seem like really good times. But if you're in Japan, in a single race, like 60 people will break 64 minutes, because in Japan you've got the corporate system, so companies literally pay people to be professional runners, right, because the relay is so strong. Companies want to beat other companies for status. In America you've got the collegiate system, which is really strong for cross country, and in the UK we've got the club system, which is really strong in cross country, and in road running as well. So it's not a strong half marathon time, even though it seems
maybe not at the elite level, but for the human, that's just sitting at home now.
It's a good human time. It's a good human time.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. Have you toyed around with this new Nike shoe?
Yes, I have. Nike sponsor me, and so I get to be like a guinea pig for them.
So just talk a little bit about what the technology is for people who don't know anything about it.
Yeah, well, I suppose like Nike's rooted in running. Yeah, so Nike formed, I think, 1968, 1970, just before the Berlin Olympics, which were the Munich Olympics, I think, in 72. So Steve Prefontaine did really well in that race, and he won as a young kid. It came fourth, and he was like the first major ambassador for Nike. And it was formed by a guy called Phil Knight, who, if you've ever read the book Shoe Dogs, brilliant read, and it's not just a great business book, but it's a good book about life and about how passionate they were in the beginning. He was a runner under a coach called Bill Bowerman, and he wasn't there, so he had the choice like to get into a regular job or to be an athlete, and it just wasn't there for him, the second choice. So he became a businessman, but wanted to still be in the sport. So he went on a world tour, went to Japan. Long story short, he started to import ASICS shoes from Japan, and then
just bring that microphone right up close. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it. Sorry. Can you hear me now? So he started to import Asics, and then they tried to basically cut him out of the deal. So overnight, it was like, okay, let's call our shoes something else. And then they came up with Nike, the Greek god of success. And so their roots is in running. And it's all about innovation. It always has been. So Bill Bowerman was playing around with not just the shoes and the grip, but like back in the 50s and 60s, he was playing around with these things, but also the actual surface of a running track. So he was playing around with this at Hayward Field, which I've been to in Portland, Oregon. So they're innovators. So fast forward to now, it's like an arms race, I suppose, against other brands to create the fastest shoe. And they created the Vaporfly 4%, which is, if you've seen it, it's usually an orange shoe. It's got a carbon plate in it, which is a bit different. It's been done before, but the way it's been done, it's definitely a fast shoe, yeah, and it's all about performance. So it's like the difference in being in a regular trainer, a regular running shoe, and being in this is like you feel as if you're in a racing shoe. So it doesn't feel so comfortable to jog in, for instance, or just go for a walk, whereas it feels it feels incredible to run fast in.
Right.
And it makes you want to run fast as well, because the faster you run, the more it works.
Really, yeah.
So now I was like, when that came out, I was like, wow, this is insane. Like, it's really quick. How are they going to improve upon this? And I went to visit Nike last year, and they were showing me the innovation department. So you've got like a linear department that's like design and stuff like that, and they're like improving on the Vaporfly 4%. But then this innovation team take ideas that have already been made and are in the market and completely like are innovative in different areas, and they create the next percent. And I thought, whatever it is, it can't be faster than the 4%, because it's just I can't think of a faster way to make a shoe. Everything was perfect. But then when I saw it and tried it on, it's like the improvements are ridiculous. Like the upper weighs 15 grams, so it's hard to think about what weighs 15 grams, but it's literally nothing.
Mm-hmm.
The upper is also like 95% water resistant. So they found that in wet races, although you had a light shoe on, which weighs a lot less than 200 grams, which is already light for a shoe, it was taking on water and therefore getting heavier, and therefore wasn't great in wet races. It's also more grippier and wider, so it's stable. And also the lacing system goes off to the side of your foot, so it takes the pressure off your main veins and arteries that are actually on the top of your foot. So all round, it's just a much, much faster shoe. Yeah.
Have you ran in it like for time?
Yeah, I've run in it for the last since it came out.
Oh, so you had this on yesterday in the race?
Yes. Yeah.
It's so because this is what the 2-hour marathon was based around, wasn't it? The sub 2.
Yeah.
So they set up, if I'm not mistaken, a controlled event in, you said Vienna just now. Is that where it is, or was this Germany?
There's been 2. So there was one in Italy at Monza racetrack, and Eliud Kipchoge. There's a lot more to Eliud Kipchoge than just being an athlete. He's won 13 of the last 13 marathons he's ran in. I've met him, and he's a ridiculously humble guy for what he is. Like this is like the Michael Jordan or the Roger Federer of the running world. This guy is like ridiculous. It's ridiculous to be that consistent and that good for that length of time. So he doesn't get the credit probably that he deserves, and there's certainly not the wealth in marathon running that there is in like basketball or Premier League football or American football or whatever. But there was a project based around him in Italy where he went for breaking 2 with Nike with this new shoe, the Vaporfly 4%, and he got 2 hours and 20 seconds. So he was just 20 seconds over. But then they showed, it was in controlled situations, so it doesn't qualify as a world record, but it showed what the power of it, and his motto is no human is limited. So it's not just like the elite, it's literally, it filters down to everybody, like, chase your dreams, go for it, and if you put full focus in, anything's possible, sort of thing, yeah.
And could you run in it if you had broken feet and metalwork?
Oh, shush.
Yeah, you could, anything's possible, right?
Anything is possible,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So we'll get Caroline in it for the next
He's trying to convince me to do a marathon, and I'm like, no, it's just not calling me right now.
Really? Well,
Yeah.
Eloit said to me in Berlin, he said, no human is limited, not even Caroline from Dubai. I was like, wow, how do you know her? He was like, everyone knows Caroline. So.
No, look, I'm going to be really honest with you. I like to do shit that makes me really happy, and and running, like I love running so much. But after you've had 7 surgeries on your feet, it just like it is pain.
Excuses, eh?
So much pain.
Excuses. Bloody hell.
So I prefer hiking.
How many? Only 7 surgeries.
Shut up.
That's seven last month.
Yeah. That's
These guys are teasing me. Don't listen to them.
we'll test it out. We'll put it on your foot and see how much comfort it
Run a
gives you.
marathon.
Look, my next thing is I really want to do a half marathon just to see if I can. That I'll go there.
There you go. See.
Yeah,
What's
no,
the
I'm with you. You know, you should. You
got to do what you love.
You've got to do what you love. Yeah. So if you do something you love, you're gonna get better.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Like there's something like you get to the end of the finish line in a running track, and it's like, okay, great.
A running track, I like that.
Yeah,
but
you get to the top of a mountain, and it's really different. So.
Yeah.
Well, you get to the end of the marathon, and then you realize you're still alive. It's like, yes. And then when you come through the recovery period, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
I'm never doing
that
again.
I feel like I just climbed Everest.
Yeah.
Fallen down all the way to the bottom. But where is it, like, because was there no rules or regulations against having a support or like an assisted trainer? There's nothing in the regulations that say like this is cheating or that's not cheating, or just everyone just go for it.
You mean the controlled situation?
No, if you were, can you wear that Nike new shoe in the Olympics?
Oh, okay, yeah. So
I'm just wondering, is it like, do people look at it and go, oh, he's cheating, or he's not cheating?
No, I mean, this is the crazy thing about the world, right? When I was in Berlin in September, so 2 months ago, they just originally this next percent, which is the event I just spoke about, was in Monza. So that was with the old Vaporfly 4%, which is like 3 years ago. Then they did another one where he actually broke 2 hours, and that was in Vienna. So literally 21k, literally 180 and back, and he did this in a new shoe that will be launched next year. So the next percent is this shoe that's currently out and available to everybody. And the crazy thing for me is in Berlin, they launched a new colorway, which was it was a fluorescent green shoe, and then they launched the pink version, And not only was I'm sure it was more than 50% of the runners that were in the race from all levels, guys who were trying to do 2 hours up to 5-6 hours, It was like half of them were in the next percent, but there were so many people in the pink shoe that had just been released that weekend. And it's almost like, I don't know if it's a status or a fashion thing, but people wanted to be in the latest. It's exactly the same as the green shoe, but they wanted to be in that latest pink shoe. So it's just nuts how the market works.
Yeah.
If the demand's there, it's going to work. But I think what you're asking is, it's okay to bring in the Olympics, yes. So it's not an illegal shoe. The rule is that if it's available to the mass market, which it is, it's completely fine. I suppose the ethical conversation that people are having are, how far does this go? Like, how fast can you sort of have wheels on the bottom of your shoe or springs or something crazy like that?
So where is that line now? Where does that line currently sit in what is allowed, permissible, and what isn't?
I think it's funny because from my perspective, I think running is not the wealthiest of sports, right? So if you have a pair of trainers, you can run, And I coach kids back in Thailand that literally don't have any shoes, so they just run on the grass, and that's great to see. And it's also something that most people should do, running bare feet so they get stronger feet. But if there's something that can help athletics or running right now, when they're competing against other sports that are much more interesting to watch, like UFC, boxing, Premier League football, in America basketball, baseball, American football, all those things, then it's great for the sport. And what happens is, naturally, other brands quickly copy. So I won't name names, but other brands all of a sudden put the same technology in their shoes and make versions of that. So people complain, but then they'll quickly make a replica, or not, I suppose maybe you can't call it a replica, like something very similar.
A variation,
Variation. Yeah,
because for a lot of these people, though, there's a lot at stake, isn't there? Like, if you've got a guy beside you who's wearing the trainers that is going to take, what would it take, 4 or 5 minutes off for an average person?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. Like, the 4% was based on a maths calculation
Okay.
on done on a lot of scientific study. And
So at the top level, 4% is a winner. It's like top 3 or not top 3.
yeah,
That's
huge.
So there's a
huge,
lot
huge.
on the line for people who use running as a mode to see the world and to get a sponsorship deal, get prize money.
Yeah. When you look at the winners of the major marathons over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, then there's definitely been a trend. There was a world record set in Berlin that was an Adidas shoe, I think 2013, but then since then it's been Nike. To a point where, bear in mind, like an athlete's career is on the line, maybe food on the table, prize money is on the line, Olympic qualification, World Championship qualification. If you've got sponsors, they want to see you at the World Championships and the Olympics and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of pressure on these runners from different brands to perform. So there's literally been lots of athletes caught with the shoe that says it's another brand, but underneath it's got the Nike.
Really?
So they've done it in 2 different ways. Either literally it's been like a home job where somebody's like said, okay, this shoe is called this when it's not, and tried to paint it over it. And then there's been athletes that have said, okay, I want this making with our sole, our upper. So it's the Nike sole.
Yeah.
So that's happened. And
when you say upper, you mean like the canvas either side?
Yeah, so the canvas, and then the sole is like where all the technology sits.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's happening, and it's happened many times, and people have been caught for it, and people have been sacked by the sponsor. But like I said, there's a lot of pressure on these athletes.
So I have a question for you. It's a little bit controversial, but have you seen the documentary Icarus?
Yeah.
So does that type of kind of high-level competition and kind of sneaky business, does that happen in running?
Yeah. I mean, without a doubt, I think it's not just running; it's any competitive
in any sport.
Yeah, and I think that the higher the stakes, the more there is. I'm definitely sure. And if we're talking about mechanical doping or blood doping or whatever.
Yeah, because in Icarus they were doing a lot of like blood doping and a lot of what other stuff did they do in that documentary?
Well, it was the drugs and then it was the cover up.
Yeah.
Like that was the big, like everybody sort of knows, all right, there's drugs in sport.
Yeah.
But we have a system in place that catches the people who do drugs and lets the people who don't do drugs rise to the top.
Yeah.
But Icarus was like cover up the drugs so that the guys who won were actually fully illegal.
So for anybody watching who's not seen Icarus, the basics of it is this guy who's pretty good on a bike, yeah? So he wants to do a race, quite a famous race in France, set over 7 days. So it's all about recovery. You know, you can be great on one day and drugs don't really come into it, but it's like how quickly you recover. And so he wanted to do it 1 year without anything, and then the next year have a specialist doctor help him with illegal, not illegal, but I don't think it's illegal. I think it's just against the rules. Yeah. So he was.
He wanted to show the difference.
He wanted to show the difference.
Yeah.
Right. And so what he actually found was not a great big difference because a lot of tactics come into cycling and stuff like that, and it's not. And that specific race wasn't a team race. So the history that cycling has is deep in doping. I mean, we're literally talking from before the 1900s, guys holding a cork in their mouth, between their teeth, that's connected to a fish wire. There's a car in front pulling a guy along.
What?
Oh my God.
There's doping cases of guys getting a ride in a car, guys getting on a bus, guys getting on a motorbike. It's just like people will do anything to win. But the funny thing, the interesting thing, and what made that actually a documentary, is all of a sudden he spoke to a guy in Russia just by chance. There's a really, really charismatic guy who basically uncovered systematic doping from government down
through into the Russian Olympics, right?
Yeah, and it was, I can't remember I think it was Sochi,
the Sochi Winter Olympics.
Olympic Games in winter, and it was just for me. There was a film released about called The Program about Lance Armstrong, about what happened there, and
because that was really controversial when he came out.
Yeah, and these are all really interesting cases. But I think, like for instance, that was meant to be like a crime thriller, when it's not. It should be a comedy because some of the stuff that comes out of that.
How so?
Well, the cases in the 80s and 90s and the turn of the millennium is literally had guys who you'd have a good doctor, but then there'd be a range of doctors who knew about certain things, the latest, more designer drugs, and then you get people who wanted to compete but had to try and do it on their own. So you'd get cases like a guy in blood doping is a blood transfusion is basically taking a portion of your blood out. Your body recreates that blood, and then you freeze that blood you've taken out and then reinfuse it. So essentially you've got more blood, then more red blood cells, then more oxygen get into your muscles. So things seem a lot easier.
So that's a definition of blood doping, is where you almost give yourself your own blood transfusion.
Yeah, that's a blood transfusion, and then there's ways to manipulate the blood as well. And I'll come to that in a second, but like there's cases where there's an Italian guy who didn't know anything about the blood. You know, a lot of these people are athletes and have always been athletes, so they've often forfeited their education, which again it comes into the Lance situation again. But a guy took 0.5 liter of blood from his dog and reinfused it into himself before a race and nearly died.
I was going to say that because, like, I've had a lot of blood transfusions and they make you really sick. Like, when you first get them, like, you get fevers and you get really nauseous and you get really sick.
Yeah.
But even when it's, like, same blood type, all of that stuff. So from a dog infusing himself, that's crazy. No wonder he almost
Imagine
died.
how that would feel before you
Yeah, it's
pass
honestly,
away.
it's not great.
But for me, it's not only funny. Yeah, it's tragic in the sense that people will do anything to win. So when Lance, and I read there's obviously more than these documentaries that we see. Like there's a lot of books written about that era because it is fascinating. And I've read I think 7 or 8 books on the topic, and there's amazing cases. Like for instance, a bus going down one of the major climbs in France during the Tour de France, and they knew that all the doping testers would be at the hotel, and so the bus driver pretended the engine was broke down, stopped the bus, and they all received the main guys received the transfusion. Then the bus was all of a sudden fine, drove to the hotel, nobody gets caught, because at that time you couldn't detect a transfusion, and you couldn't detect at a certain point EPO, which is something that people inject in order to boost the amount of red blood cells in your body so that you can work harder.
Yeah.
And so when Lance and his crew got to Europe, they were the best in America. Like 330 million in America. They were killing it in America. Like Lance was unbelievable. And they got to Europe and they were getting killed. And they were like, what? It can't be different genetics, Europeans to Americans. We're the same people. So what's the difference? And then they realized how widespread doping was. And it was either, do you go home, bear in mind you forfeited your education, and become maybe a plumber or electrician or something, or do you sort of like join the show and like start doping? Because that sense, you probably feel like it's really difficult, because I'm 36 now, so I sort of view the world in a different way to when I was 22. But I don't know how a 22-year-old me would have reacted to that situation.
Is there a lot of pressure for elite athletes to constantly win?
Yeah, of course, yeah. And in every level, in every sport, there's huge pressures. Yeah, it's like we watch sport for their entertainment. Even yesterday, there would have been like huge pressures for those guys to win. Prize money is $100,000. Agents will be rife, so they'll be taking 50% of that.
Really, yeah.
So the winner will get 50,000. And bear in mind, there's probably 50 Africans there, let's say, going for maybe
win.
15 of them going for the top spot. So of course, what you then have is like, okay, the agents are involved with certain athletes. You've got certain groups, and they're just obviously a money-making machine. You've had cases where the managers are actually doping the athletes because they want them to succeed.
Oh.
You've got coaches doping athletes. You've got you're from a small village in Kenya. Your only hope to get out of that village and do something apart from farming for $20 a month is to become a runner. You have a natural gift at running, but there's also 300 other guys in your country that are also just as good as you. And somebody tells you that in 2 years you could be winning this, you could be basically the equivalent of multi-millionaire if you just take these vitamin shots. That's all I'll say. Something like vitamin shots, yeah. Just to, and I'm sort of basic quoting cycling here, but the same would have happened in running. Just to keep you healthy, because you're training so hard, so you need extra vitamins. And that guy will be completely ignorant.
So I'm sorry for asking you a really, maybe this is a silly question, but is there a group of, say, elite marathon runners that just go around the world just for the prize money of marathons, like marathon prize money?
Yeah, I mean, make no mistake about it. There's
and agents and managers and that are just taking people around
agents
the
and
world.
managers are 100% are in it for the money only. Coaches are sometimes in it for the love. More often than not, are in it for the love of it. In certain countries, running is business, and in certain countries, running is a hobby and recreation. And obviously, it gets serious if you get to the Olympic or World Championship stage. But in Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, those guys are running for business. They don't do it for the love of it. I mean, some of them will put out a message. I'm sure Eliud Kipchoge loves running. Yeah, I'm sure he loves what running has done for his life. In the same way that Jorge Masvidal in the UFC would love what fighting has done for his life, and he loves fighting. But he probably loves everything to do with fighting. He probably loves the whole crew, both of them, yeah? Probably love all the mates that are so dedicated. Eliud is a true professional and somebody that I wouldn't think would go down that route just because he's a purist. But what I was saying then is, like, say if you had that situation where, okay, just take these vitamins, and you don't know what's in the syringe, and then, you know, all of a sudden you start winning, and it's like, okay, we've got to keep these vitamin shots going because otherwise I'll stop winning. And all of a sudden you get popped for doping, and these African guys don't even know what they've been doing. So they could pass a lie detector test, no problem, in the same way that a lot of cyclists pass lie detector tests, because in their mind they weren't doping because, in their mind they weren't cheating because everybody was doping. So they were just, you know, coming to the playing field at the same level. So I suppose the point is it's like you sort of like changed by your environment, and also what becomes the norm is like it very, very quickly becomes the norm. So what's going on around you and how you become a professional and how you sign a contract is I mean, it's just all psychology.
Yeah, I was going to say, the public don't see that side of it. They don't see the psychological side of it. They just see that cheat out, you know?
Yeah.
If you're a cheater, it must be because of the money. It must be because you wanted that ahead of the others, so just, you're a bad person, see you later. But there's people's livelihoods and people's families' livelihoods and futures on the line.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I think, you know, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's like, it's the same with politics, right? It's like, if you try and sort of like give the general public who have no idea, like I have like maybe 1% of an idea about politics. I know what I think the world should look like and what my country should look like. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And I'm in athletics. I'm a professional runner, but I don't know what's going on with these companies and these agents, really. I know what stories come out, and I know what to believe and who to believe in credible sources, but we don't really know. So then if you throw a guy who's just like, what do you mean? He was putting injections into himself. Like, okay, ban him for life. And it's just more, and that's even in the athletics community, because people just can't handle it. Because we're very good at being hypocrites in Britain, I think. And so you'll get something like a case where, you know, a Kenyan gets busted for doping, and or, you know, a South American gets busted for doping. It's like, oh, those South Americans or the Russians have always been cheating, yeah? Like Icarus. Like, if my view on Icarus is like, okay, if we're saying that this is systematic doping, the whole Olympic team is doping, and it's being done in such a crazy way that we need to literally chop the head off the snake. The head of the snake is not the head of Russia. The head of the snake is the head of the IAAF, which is a British guy. And so, have you ever seen that scene in Casino where it's like Robert De Niro is the manager of a casino. He's got this cowboy working for him who's like the son of a local sheriff. So he's got his job. He's not very gifted, but he's got his job. And all of a sudden, 3 fruit machines are won within 5-minute period. Basically, Robert De Niro just goes over and goes, "What the fuck? You're fired." And he's like, "Why am I fired? It's just look. It's like, do you know what the odds are of 3 fruit machines winning $1 million within the space of 5 minutes? You've been done. Like, and so when the sheriff comes to try and get his lad's job back, it's like either he's dumb and doesn't understand, or he was in on it. It has to be one or the other. So he's either incompetent or he was in on it. And for me, that's the case with the IAAF. It's either you knew about it and you're therefore in on it indirectly, or you're too dumb and therefore you should be replaced. Because if that is happening, like in today, it's just ridiculous. And like one person came forward or something, now has to live in a different country, or including the guy as well as the guy. It's just again, it's psychology. The way that what people will do. Like there was a study done. I'm not sure exactly which year, but it's quite recent, and it was done with guys and girls that had a scholarship for being like top in track and field, or top in Olympic sports, yeah. And the question was, if you could win an Olympic medal, but you would die within 5 years, would you take it? And 50% said yes, I would take it. So they've just, all their life has been about competition and winning. They've been the best in their little town, their county, their province, and then their country. And it's just always been about winning. And the top level is to win an Olympic medal, and then once you've done that, that's it. You don't have to do anything more. Yeah. So they would take it, and that statistic would be staggering for the public to hear. But if you hang around like professional cyclists enough, or professional athletes, or professional sports people of any kind, you'll know that to be at that level anyway, to be a professional footballer, you have to be ruthless. You have to want it so much that there's nothing else in your mind apart from winning. Unless you're insanely talented, like the guys that go off the rails, like Paul Gascoigne and George Best and stuff like that. People, and Maradona, people that can literally turn up after a night out and still be amazing. Everybody else has to be, especially these days when everybody is ridiculously fit in every sport. There's no fat footballers anymore, right? Yeah. Everyone's an athlete. So that's my view on it.
Except maybe American footballers. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, no, that's
Some
right.
of them
Sumo
are
wrestlers
really
are big. Sumo wrestlers, no skinny sumo wrestlers.
That's true. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
Mm.
A bauble here.
The Christmas tree.
Christmas tree stabbing you in the back. So what happens when that, what happens behind the scenes when you guys would find out that a certain athlete or a certain competitor has been caught? Is there a little community? Obviously, just not. You're not all close mates, but there must be a bit of surprise or a bit of we knew it, or he had it coming to him.
As you know, I'm from Manchester. I'm British. I live in Spain 8 months of the year, and I live in Thailand 4 months of the year. Thais are so far away from all that I'm sure there's corruption within Thai Muay fighting and football in Thailand. In Spain, there's definitely a different view on doping. In Britain, we literally throw the book at somebody who's caught doping in any sport. So, but if you're in the game, I train alone 9% of the time running, and cycling I'll go for rides a few times a week with lads. But mainly I train alone. So, but if you're in a training group, you know about it. You know who makes. It's very clear to see who makes big jumps in their career, but then that's also an argument against. It's if you've remained steady, and this is something that happened in cycling, yeah. So in cycling, this would a better explanation of it. In cycling, they brought in there's a lot of people dying through EPO. Abuse, right? So people are literally, if your heart rate goes below a certain point, your heart can just stop, yeah? So your blood can get that thick that your heart will stop. So there was literally a point, and this again is part of a comedy, I think. There's literally guys running around the hotel at 4 o'clock in the morning to try and elevate the heart rate and then going back to sleep, because they sleep with a chest monitor on, and it sets an alarm off if it goes below a certain point. So I mean, what was your question again?
Oh, it was.
You were talking about how from behind the scenes, like what goes on?
Yeah,
No.
so stuff like that you would know, and then like on you'd have to. There's a red thread, but actually my point was
Keith asked you what you would do if you found somebody in your community that was...
Yeah.
Well, you were saying
Well,
that in England they throw the book at people.
Yeah, I was trying to say, in cycling, for instance, they said, okay, right, what we're going to do to stop this from happening is you're going to have your hematocrit, which is the amount of red blood cells, the ratio of red blood cells to the rest of the blood, is going to be capped at 50%. And they thought that was a sensible idea to keep people alive, right? Which it did keep people alive. But what it did is, if your hematocrit was naturally lower than 50, you would elevate it to 50 and think that you're on a level playing field. So this trajectory, which should be quite smooth in an athlete's career, maybe in a growth spurt it would go up, but should be quite smooth, had to remain, because once they said, okay, we can now detect EPO within the blood, then everybody had to keep their hematocrit at the level that they'd always said it was, because at that time there was then a blood passport. So they knew you as a person have a unique blood profile, right? So in order to keep that, they in order to stay in a sport, they would have to keep doping. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. So if you said,
so how? Sorry to interrupt you there. How would they do that if now they could detect EPO? So how are they keeping those levels, still having to dope to some degree, so they could keep those levels, but if they were now detecting it?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, yeah, and the only answers I can give you are from the books that I've read, and it's like microdosing. So it's basically, and this is the whole problem with doping, is you have the World Anti-Drug Administration, or whatever it's called, WADA, and you have, like, each country has its own administration, but they're like this compared to the commercialism of sport. So they're always, the teams and the athletes are always ahead of the game. So there will be microdosing in order to get the same reading and
not detectable levels.
And then now there's different ways of doping. So hematocrit doesn't necessarily need to be high, but the way each blood cell takes oxygen to the muscle, there is a way for that to be more efficient. So then it's like, how do you detect that? And in the future, what we're going to see, and when I say the future, I mean probably from 10 years ago onwards, there's gene doping. So how do you detect somebody's own genes within themselves? Like it's so again, it's like
this is when you go into really big ethical questions about what is scientifically permissible when it comes to genetics and when it comes to tampering with humans and what that line is. And I think it's still very grey, particularly in science. It's very grey, and it needs to be clear.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I can't remember the documentary I watched quite recently, but it was talking about gene doping, and it was talking about we need to give this to everybody, otherwise it's only going to be available to the rich. Well,
there's a lot of epigenetics as well that's involved in this too. Anyway.
Yeah, so it's a whole different podcast, but it was fascinating because, as I say, it's sort of a comedy, but it's sort of a tragedy as well, because this is really sad. Like, for a guy to have to go over to Europe and this is Lance's case. Like, everybody throws a book at Lance. He's like the most hated sports person for a long time on the planet, but for me, it was my hero growing up. And so I tried to see it from both sides. I tried to see him as the bully that he was with a lot of people, but defending a secret. So defending a lot of people's jobs, and probably 200 jobs, depending on him retaining that he was clean.
The whole Livestrong charity depended on it as well. All the money that he was raising for the Livestrong community.
The whole Livestrong charity, Trek Bicycles, was a $100 million company and was a $1 billion company at the end of his...
That's a lot of pressure for an athlete to have that much pressure. Look, at the end of the day, this is how I see things. You can never really judge a person's circumstance until you're inside their own mind and inside their own body. So it's very hard for people on the outside to throw stones and say, look, you shouldn't have done this. Or obviously it's illegal and it's not right, but it's human circumstance. It's challenging.
Yeah. Yes, it's really...
I have a question for you.
That's what you meant to do, isn't it? Ask me questions.
Oh, yeah. So here, what would you do? What have you done in the past to win? And what would you do psychologically, mentally, physically to win? Where's your line?
It's difficult to say. Like an elbow in the face, no problem at all. No problem. Like, even
would you put a cork in your mouth
and be
tie it
dragged
to a
back
fish
up?
line?
I'd be worried about my teeth. No, but as kids, like, we were like, I'm literally talking as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid. I was taught, like, when you start, make sure your elbows are up, so you're like hitting people in the face who are also trying to hit you in the face. So that's pretty funny. But like, and you're 8 years old, you know, you're trying to bust somebody's nose.
Who's telling you that?
People, my coach at the time, who's probably watched this.
Bang.
Yeah. John,
He's probably watching, going, "Yeah, look where I got you now."
Yeah,
Yeah,
John,
look at you now, professional. I was right.
John, if you're watching, I still do the same today. But in answer to your question, I'm 36, so I don't need to take any risks. And also, I think we are pretty narrow-minded as the general public when it comes to certain things. Like, I don't know what goes on behind the scenes in, like, the Vietnamese war, for instance. I don't know really what goes on. I know what I see, I know what I don't like, I know what I don't want war, but I don't know what deals are done under the table in Iraq and all these things. So I can't just be... I try to see things from both sides, but you just don't know. Like, apparently the most corrupt sport in the world is sumo wrestling, because...
What?
Yeah, so the way that there's a lot of gambling in sumo wrestling, and the way the competitions are set up, it's easy for you... I think it was Free Economics I read this in, and the way that the competitions are set up, you can qualify before your last sort of 3 events or something. So if you've got like a small guy against a really big guy, and the chances is like 300 to 1 that this little guy's going to win, a lot of people put a lot of money on it and pay this guy to lose, and then he's not lost anything, he's still through to the finals or whatever. Whenever there's money involved, yes, you know, there's corruption, but then it's easy for the general public to see it and say, right, that guy cheated because he wanted to win. But then you hear about cases in Italy, like last year there was 2 66 and a 68-year-old guy were both caught with motors in a bicycle for a cycling race. And it's like, what were you trying to win? Like, and it's literally local status. He just wants to go into his local bar or restaurant that night and say, I want to race today. That's it. So when you have that sort of sport competitive mindset, but then, do you know, it's not just sport, is it? It's like, what about banking? You know,
Yeah.
Do you think crazy things happen in banking? Of course we know that. So if you were to go in like the Walmart or something like that, and the girl behind the till gives you change of $50 instead of change of $20, how many people in that moment will say, hey, I owe you $30? How many people say that? Or do they just think, I'm ripping off Walmart? Or do they think, that girl could actually lose her job because of this? So it's like, in the moment, what, you know, who are you? Who are you really? And so when I go to bed at night, I know that I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And I feel sorry when it happens, when stuff breaks, especially in Spain, it's quite regular. When stuff breaks and it's like somebody's been caught for doping, it's like, we all sort of knew that, right? We know that, firstly, that guy is running specifically for business only. He doesn't, I don't know whether he loves the sport or not, but he's not doing it for the right reasons. But what are the right reasons as well? You know, you don't know whether people have different reasons for doing things. But then sometimes when it's shocking, it's quite disappointing. But also it's like everybody will then flee as if a bomb's dropped. Like, okay, it's untouchable. Where it's actually probably, if you've got a guy who's all his life he's been a professional athlete, and then he's 28 years old and he gets busted for doping, he's lost his job, probably his house, his car, his wife will probably leave him. At that moment, he needs a friend, and probably all his friends will flee as well, because it's like untouchable. So
do you know anybody that's happened to, without like saying names?
I've raced I have competitors that, and this is another thing, it's like I have competitors that have been busted for doping, and you're like, and it has happened, yeah, somebody's offered me just small races, yeah, but somebody's called me and said, okay, that race you did 2 years ago, the winner's just been done, and therefore we're going to back check all the races, and therefore you won.
Okay.
I'm going to send you the gold medal. I was like, I don't want a gold medal. Like, that was 2 years ago. It's like, let's just move on. Just, it's not good for the sport if anybody gets busted. So although you don't want to sweep it under the carpet, it's like, let's just not make a song and dance about it. Just it's probably a minority view, but I feel a lot of empathy for the person, because not only have they had to live a lie for a long time, but they've also just ruined their life, and a lot of the time it comes with depression and suicide afterwards.
Right.
So there's nothing to celebrate about. It's nothing to say like, oh yeah, this guy. Like, you will never hear from these Kenyans and Ethiopians and that pocket of East Africa. When those guys get busted, or Russians get busted, you never hear from them again, because they can't come back. And when they have come back before in the past, it's like usually in cycling, where you give them another chance because you just have phenomenal ability, but you usually never hear from them again. So what are they doing? And it's quite sad, isn't it? It's quite for me. It was quite sad to see the way George Best died. You know, when you're an old drunken man just chundering onto yourself at the end of a bar, but you were once amazing.
Yeah,
that's quite sad. Where you'd prefer Pele's and at the end of Muhammad Ali's life, I'd prefer that. You know, like, you go out with dignity, and so it's really it's just really sad, and it's tragic that it has to happen. The good thing about running and athletics is, unless you're really, really up there, you're probably not going to have a support system around you that's going to encourage you to cheat, because there's not much at stake in order for you to do it.
Yeah.
I think so. That's what protects our sport more than most, I think. Yeah. I mean, a couple of years ago, like, UFC was getting huge, right? But there was obvious cases in the UFC where you have guys with unnatural
old guys who are huge
physiques, and so they brought in the guy who actually caught Lance Armstrong. I think he's called Jeff Nowitzki. They brought in him to do the drug testing, and it was like, I remember thinking, are you sure you want to do this to your sport? Because there's going to be a lot of surprises for the heads and the shareholders and stuff like that, and this is a company that only floated last year, I think. So do you really want to do this to the sport, or was it because they knew they wanted to float that they need to make it a sport that was drug tested? They tested a guy anyway, who had a testosterone level twice the maximum amount that it was supposed to, and apparently, like, I was watching a Joe Rogan podcast, and apparently it was like a silverback gorilla, this guy, But then I think that was the Lance Armstrong Joe Rogan podcast, and then it's like, Joe Rogan's conclusion was better than any interview that has ever been done with Lance Armstrong, because when he was interviewed by Oprah's just like, oh my God, you did what? Like, how did that make you feel? You know, and Bill Burr jokes about this. It's like, how did that make you feel? And it's like, you're really shocked by this, Oprah? You work in Hollywood, yeah? You never had to step on anybody's head to get ahead. And Joe Rogan just broke it down, like, you're not a UFC fighter whose aim is to try and go in the cage and fight and kill another opponent. You're not cheating for that reason. You're cheating to win a bicycle race. And it sounds to me, his conclusion was really quick, like, it sounds to me like you've gone over there as just a bunch of dopers. You've just started doping and done it a bit better than everybody else. Is that right? And Lance was like, it's pretty much the nail on the head, yeah? But put that to the general public, and of course everyone's going to be, what? Like, you can't possibly cheat? I mean, that's like... But as we've just said, like, you're in Walmart, somebody gives you too much money change, are you going to tell them or not? You go to an ATM and it gives you all the maximum amount and it doesn't take it out of your bank account. Are you going to call your bank, or are you just going to think, bank's got loads of money, I've got no money? So who are you? That's
a good question. Who are you, Lee?
Yeah.
Amazing.
But I suppose in running as well, it's not a super technological sport. Like, people don't have the kind of money to then go and, like, cheat, you know, and get away with some of the high, what am I trying to say? Like, the high technical ways of cheating. You know, like, the UFC guys had a lot of money. They get a lot of prize money, so they can go, they can pay this guy, they can pay that guy, they can keep that guy quiet. The runners just, you know, I'm sure everyone's, if you're doing it, you're probably going to get caught. Like, do you know people who've got caught and not been publicly busted? Is there anyone in that?
Yeah. You would definitely. I mean, there's a history of certain things were legal. I mean, the history of certain things were legal at certain times, and now there's retrospective doping. So you can freeze samples of urine.
Do you get tested? Do you get your blood tested?
Yeah.
How do they test you? What is a test? What's the experience of a test?
You pee into a cup. They take your blood.
Very technical.
And then
Just that simple.
Tell you, and they tell you in a time where I don't think you even hear if it's come back okay. I think it's only if it's bad that you hear. So yeah, and you have like a whereabouts scheme, so you have to sort of like say an hour a day where you have to be for 365 days a year. But the retrospective doping that I was talking about was, they can then, obviously science improves and the testing gets like more. So now, as you've seen in the UFC, they can detect pictograms.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's a pictogram? It's like a grain of sand in a whole swimming pool. What the fuck? So then when you retrospectively test people that have left the sport, what's in it for the sport to say that person was banned? So then when you think of outliers in terms of world records or crazy races that have been won by people who have been a nobody and then all of a sudden are a somebody, it's like, why are we not? Surely something happened there, and it's pretty obvious when you know what you're looking at. But I think a lot gets covered up. Yeah, a lot gets covered up, and I think that will come from the top down. So, you know, I'm down here, yeah, and so it comes from up here, and I think from the top there's definitely a reason to keep the sport clean, and as I was saying about the UFC, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure, like, they know now in the UFC, right? Like, when Jorge Masvidal fought Nate Diaz, they knew, they had a mutual respect for each other. They knew neither of them had ever taken illegal substances, or at least neither of them had ever taken steroids. Probably both done cannabis, but
definitely.
It was, yeah. I mean,
well, I think Diaz is like openly I think there's a YouTube video of him getting on stage at a press conference in California, and he just lights up.
Well, the thing about UFC, this is how it should be, because like you don't want to be an athlete. It's pretty boring. You can't get, you can't have a good time. Yeah. So you need to be available for testing all year round, whereas in the UFC it's seasonal. If you're ready to fight, then they'll start to test you and stuff like that. And that's how it used to be in cycling. It was in competition testing. So only when you went to a race could you get tested. But of course you hope all the way around.
Yeah.
Know exactly, because you have a team doctor, when this stuff will be out of your system. Stop it at the right time, then race on a high.
I think it's the same for strongman competitions as well, if I'm honest. I think strongmen are tested circulating the events.
Yeah.
But not all year round. Because I know the footballers have to do the same. In the UK, they have to give it 24/7 notice of where they are. Yeah. And these guys can just come bang on their door at 2 a.m. and say, right, time to for the drug test.
Yeah.
It's this crazy disruptive way to be living.
Yeah, sure, 100%. Yeah. The interesting thing for me is, firstly, the more money in a sport, the more chance of it is of happening. You see crazy things happening in certain events. Like in certain sports, like in football, you see people recovering from injuries like at a ridiculous rate. Like, but then let me put a scenario to you, and you can answer yes or no. Like, David Beckham ruptures his Achilles, so he snaps his Achilles in two. Back of his Achilles is there, and it's ripped, literally ripped. Yeah, and apparently to have that surgery, it's like sewing two mops together. Yeah, it's horrendous, and the chances of him walking again 20 years ago were impossible. Yeah. Do you want to give him every drug that's possibly available on the planet in order to get David Beckham on the field because of his commercial worth, or do you just say, listen, follow the rules?
Yeah, Wayne Rooney.
Well, look, there's a big grey area when it comes to healing as well, because I've tried a lot of this stuff, and I've always wondered, like if I'm doing this, I wonder what all of the elite athletes are doing. Like, I've had ozone treatments and blood doping as well, like stuff like that, just to heal, just to get better and just to have more oxygen, because oxygen makes you heal faster. Yeah. So you can imagine what some of these athletes are doing in that grey therapeutic area. There's like, okay, I'm going to try this, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to have these vitamin infusions, or I'm going to... There's a lot of stuff you can do that's very much in that grey area.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, though, like...
And if that was the case, as an athlete, sorry to interrupt you, I would be doing everything as an athlete, everything in that grey zone to get healthier and to heal and to go back to doing what you love. So I can relate to...
Yeah, me too. And you know, you could put me on a lie detector test here and say, if you could take a pill once a day for the rest of your life, but you never get injured, would you take it? I'd say absolutely. No problem. I don't want to cheat to be have an advantage.
Yeah.
But I'll take that pill.
Yeah, but when you talk about vitamins and minerals and you think, okay, well, like if I take all of these vitamins and minerals, I'm going to heal faster, or I'm going to be a little bit more stronger, or have much more micronutrients in my body, then you're gonna do that with vitamins and minerals, of course. Yeah. So it's
something we've not covered here, which is a really important point, is therapeutic use exemplary, I think it's called.
Well, this is what I was going to say. Sorry, but I didn't want to interrupt either of you earlier on, but ethically, are you able to withhold some treatment for somebody in order to get them from a minus back to par? Do you know? Like if there's a strategy for this person to come back from a brutal, where one of their tissues is completely separated and they need some sort of surgical input. So can you ethically say you're not allowed to do that as a human? As a sports person, you're not allowed to do that because you got competition. But as a human, as a person who's alive on this planet, who's got a family and who's got a whole life ahead of you, can you withhold this sort of stuff from people just because it goes outside what their contract says over here, because they run around a pitch and they kick a ball into a net and the opposite, you know? So from that instance, I think it's a really interesting question to think, like, once you have somebody who's injured, because Wayne Rooney came back, I don't know if it was ACL or MCL, like 6 months instead of being a 9 to 12 months. So if he never plays football again, whatever, who cares? Let him do what he wants. But because he's playing football, now we have to abide by this list over here, and then you've got a potential. Now we're being unethical by punishing him.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think exactly that. Yeah, and of course you're not, like, they're not putting themselves through a regular day's work or something like that, putting their body under like a lot of duress. So. Yeah, I do think those things should be available, but then the problem goes, and it's like, it's a really long conversation, but where does that stop and where does it start? Like, what level do you need to be at for that to be okay? Yeah. Because I know certain treatments are really expensive, so they're only going to be available to certain teams or players, whereas does that then separate and divide? Or
because you can have therapeutic stem cell treatments where you take, your own stem cells out of your hip and inject them into your body. Then you can have umbilical cord stem cells re-injected. They're expensive treatments. You can even put them into your joints to reduce inflammation, and it's like, okay, if it's my own stem cells, I guess that's okay. If it's somebody else's, maybe not.
But then it's my stem cells from when I was 21, but now I'm 37.
Yeah. So there's that, and the therapeutic use exemplary is basically if you have low testosterone, or if you have a low blood
hemoglobin count.
Yeah, so if you're anemic, sort of like, you can have like a therapy, basically a doctor's note for taking EPO or something to boost that back up. So when do you stop taking that? Like, when do you go to the doctor to check you're okay, and do you want it to go back down? So people abuse those, of course, and the same with testosterone. If you train really hard as an athlete, testosterone goes down. So how do you get it back up? You used to say, okay, you have to eat loads of certain foods, but now you can just get doctors know. So what happened is all these cycling teams had their own doctors. So it was like getting a doctor's note was very, very easy to do. And so, where does that stop? And again, where does it start? And the problem.
And what are the standards? What are the averages for what your hemoglobin count should be? Or I know what that is. Like it's about 12, right? 12 is the hemoglobin count. If you're under, you're under, then you can have a transfusion. If you're,
and it's crazy because what you ultimately don't want is like an environment where, in order to get into a sport, a young kid needs to take something. You don't want it to become that unnatural. There'll be a part. I think Malcolm Gladwell said this. He wants to see everything's open for everybody. So he wants to see how far a guy can run, how fast the guy can, how long and how high people can jump. He wants to just see like freak Olympics.
It's an interesting one if they had a freak Olympics, because then I foresee a world where we kind of touched on it. People are not only taking like gene improving treatments, but I mean, if you look at how big a gorilla gets legitimately off eating like plants.
Yeah.
What kind of genes has he got? How can we pull that out? How can we give it to this guy? And then, okay, well, let's give that guy also, let's give him cheetah genes. And in like 200 years, have we got some sort of superhuman of every type green people? Are we living in something like Total Recall?
Then you're playing like genetic roulette. And I think they're already doing that to fruits and vegetables. I don't think we want to be playing that game.
I think they're already doing it with people. And then the Olympics would be something like basically like a online shopping channel.
Yeah.
So I'll have some of that.
Yeah.
Some of that, and not so much of that.
And also, look, we're gonna have a baby now. Okay, what way do you want your baby human to be?
Yeah.
Do you want them to be tall, blue eyes, brown eyes?
Yeah.
If you can just pick from that list.
Yeah, I think it's already happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is.
Anyway, let's end with that note.
Yeah. So Lee,
you can be anybody you want. Make sure you choose the right parents. Yeah.
And let's go back to who are you, Lee?
Who are you? Good. That's
now, and I'm going to ask you in 50 years.
Who do you want to be, and what animal, and do you want to fly? Where can people track your stuff online?
So you can go to my Instagram page, which is, I think, last year and this year, it's been voted the funniest Instagram page in the world.
Really?
Amazing.
In the West and the East.
I do like that photo of you upside down on your head.
You like all the photos, Caroline?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
So that's jungle.vip.
Can I ask you, why is it jungle.vip?
Yeah, because of the Jungle Book. It's the orangutan who sings I'm the king of the jungle VIP.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I got it.
But people give a shit about it. People could say, hey, who the fuck you think you are, the Jungle VIP? That's like ridiculous. Like,
the first time I saw it, I knew what it was.
Yeah.
The Jungle Book.
Yeah.
I'm the king of the swing.
I have no idea.
Jungle
no idea.
VIP.
Yeah,
I've always wanted to ask you that.
But then, I don't know, like I've been asked by sponsors, do you mind changing that and just using your real name so people can find you more easily? I'm like, because they asked me to change my profile picture was basically me sat on a rock, naked in the jungle, right? And so they asked me to change that and the jungle.vip to just my name and me. And so we negotiated for some time and came to, okay, I'll take the naked picture down. But it's not obviously full frontal naked. Yeah. It's just like a glimpse of what you could have. No, I'm not.
But
not
that's
what you could have also, Keith.
You got well.
Just so I'm not leaving you out, yeah?
Thanks for the inclusion. But you got to keep the Jungle VIP. So that's it, online, jungle.vip. What events have you got coming up this year?
This year I think it's going to be pretty quiet. Like, just had a cross-country meet with the school that I'm coaching. So that was really interesting. There's going to be, maybe I'll do the Chang Mai Marathon in about 3 or 4 weeks. There's a lot of my Maldivian friends that are coming over for that, because I went to their race in January, I think it was. And then next year it's just all build up to May, June, and then September. But I'll do a lot of like training races like yesterday in between. So there'll be loads going on,
Yeah. Cool. And you can ask Lee anything on your Instagram pretty much any day of the week.
Yeah. And it literally is anything. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me again.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.